one of the weird questions you might get, instead of historical circumstances, is geographic context or geographic circumstances. Usually when you get a question about this, it's gonna be about a map. So if you get a question about geographic circumstances, it's asking you what is going on with the land that led to the history being shown. So let's talk about the history being shown. Okay, great, right? Scramble for Africa, Berlin Conference. What did the Europeans do? Right, they took over Africa, right? They split it up into a bunch of European-controlled segments. Right, Ethiopia remains independent, as well as this thing. So if it's asking you about geographic circumstances, if you write, like if you on the Regents got this question, and you wrote the geographic circumstances was the Berlin Conference and the Scramble for Africa, you're not getting credit, because you didn't tell me anything about geography. What is on the land that caused this history? Right, the natural resources. So you'd have to tell me that the natural resources, I won't write out the whole answer because some of you guys already did this, the natural resources caused the Europeans to go to Africa and take it over. If you wrote that, you'll get credit, because natural resources is on the land. Does that make sense, guys? Don't write that, don't just do that, but just say, Africa contained many natural resources, such as gold, rubber, and diamonds, which caused the Europeans to take over Africa. If you tell me that, you get the answer, because you mentioned something about the land. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does, right? Unlikely that you're going to get this, because they did this last June, but you never know. I like these. I think these are easy, personally. It's easier to remember stuff about land than I think stuff about history. So that is a tricky one. I think audience is the single hardest thing to appear on a Regents exam. Audience means who the person is speaking to, because when you're speaking to certain groups of people, you change what you say to meet their needs, right? I could just talk to you guys about all this information as if it was a college class and say a lot of big fancy words and assume you know all the vocabulary. I don't do that because my audience is high school kids. Does that make sense? Yes. At the same time, I don't stand up here and go, so little Kwame Nkrumah one day. No, I don't talk to you like little kids either, right? I talk to you as if you were 10th graders. So if the example I always like to give is, and I apologize if I'm being repetitive, right? If I'm going to Yankee Stadium to give a speech, who's my audience? Yankees fans. So if I'm giving a speech about baseball teams and I don't want everyone to hate me, what am I saying in my speech?
Yankees are great.
Yankees are great.
Best.
Red Sox suck.
Red Sox suck. Mets are trash. Yankees are great. Right? Because, so that's me. Even though there were some great Mets teams and Red Sox teams, I'm not going to say that in my speech, because that's not what the Yankee fans want to hear. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So when you get a question about audience, you got to ask yourself, who is the person speaking to, and what do they want to hear? The what do you want to hear is going to be in that source, and that's what you have to put in your answer. So in this document, this Kwame Nkrumah guy, he's speaking to the people that helped fight a war against the British to get them out of Ghana, which is a country in Africa. Right, so think about that. Imagine you're sitting in an audience. The guy who's going to take over your country is giving a speech. What do you want to hear in that speech? Praise, all right, cool, like thank you for helping me do this, right? Thanks for your support. What else do you want to hear? We're going to make the country better, right? I want to hear that, right? We don't have to live in fear anymore. We're going to have a lot of freedom, right? That's the stuff I want to hear from my new president, especially if I just help that guy fight a war. Does that make sense? So now that I know what to expect, I'm going to look for that in my source here. And if you were to read this, you would see it, right? He's talking about how these people are now free, right? He's thanking, I want to take this opportunity to thank the people of the country for helping them win independence. So these are the things now that are supposed to be in your answer, right? So I'm going to say Kwame Nkrumah emphasizes,
Can I take a picture of this?
you can, emphasizes how his people will now live in freedom, and he thanks those people who helped him defeat the British. Okay, I did not make this up. This stuff is what I underlined in the source. I just paraphrased it. I put it into my own words. Does that make sense at all? If you're not comfortable paraphrasing, you can quote it. You can quote the document. I just don't like doing that because I find it lengthy and annoying. So I just use my own words. Okay, so how does the audience affect his speech? He talks about these things. He wants his people to like him, right? Always when you give a speech, you don't want to get thrown stuff. You don't want stuff getting thrown at you, right? You don't want hate, right? You want people to like you. So I'm going to tell people what they want to hear. You're going to have freedom now. It's going to be awesome. Does that make any sense? Hopefully. So ask yourself, what do those people want to hear? Find it in the source, and then put that stuff as your answer. I hope you don't get these because they're hard, but that's what you have to try to do. Turning point, guys, is a specific historical event that changes the course of history. Because if you looked at these things, document 1 is Africa getting taken over, right? Document 2 is, hey, we're independent now, life is awesome. That doesn't just happen. Some specific thing had to happen in the middle that changed the history, that kind of maybe convinced the Europeans that it's time to give countries independence. So what could have happened between the documents, a specific thing that convinced the British, okay, it's time to go home now. World War II. How is World War II a turning point in this situation? Explain it to me, because you have to do that. Okay, let's do it together, right? So part A, you identify one turning point associated with the documents was World War II. That gets you 1 point out of 2, just doing that. I would put a 1 right here for that. Before World War II, this is where I have to use information from document 1, Africa was colonized by Europe. After World War II, African nations became independent. So what I did with this second sentence, or the sentences 2 and 3 rather, is I used evidence from both docs 1 and 2. The only thing I didn't do yet is explain. Like, how the heck is World War II responsible for all this? Think about what happened in World War II. Why would the British start saying, you know what, it's time to go home after World War II? They lost a lot of their military strength, right? How am I going to maintain a massive overseas empire if my army is wiped out, right? That's certainly part of it. Plus the financial cost, right? They have to rebuild the British cities, right, after all those German bombings. So I'm going to explain with my last sentence. This is because the British lost a lot of military strength after the war. If you say that, that's all you need to do. You don't have to explain this in a full-blown essay. Identify the turning point, use the documents to tell me what life was like before and after, and try to explain it a little bit. I think these are hard because you have to remember the big events that happen between things. That's what makes these really, really difficult. Whereas cause and effect, you can kind of get away with not really knowing as much. So I hope you guys don't get this, and I hope you don't get audience, but like I said, I really have no idea.
I think you should just open up the same.
If it wasn't turning point, it would either be cause effect or similarity difference.